For those that were here this morning, Sean from Fullsteam will be speaking to us, giving us the closing keynote. Throughout the planning of this process, I've gotten to know Sean a little bit, so he's got a very unique and inspiring story. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say. So with that, don't want to steal his thunder. So Sean, I guess your mic. So.
I'm mic'd up, yeah. Hi, oh, thanks, yes. Cue the applause. Yes, thanks to our co-leader here on this conference for kicking off the applause on that one. I'm glad to be here. As I think I explained to you, I'm familiar with the environs. It's always good to come back on campus. I am a year 2000 MBA and Master of Public Policy grad, and my Fuqua ties and my Duke ties go deep, and excited to present to you about my path towards entrepreneurship. And so in thinking about framing this, I thought what I'd cover with you is kind of this eventual entrepreneur to actual entrepreneur, and sort of accidental leader to what I hope is actual leader. And I think that'll make a little bit more sense as we go through. But I do want to make it super casual, and y'all have put a lot of your valuable time and energy into the day, so we'll you just jump in, ask me questions, and I always notice, like, do you ever think when people say, like, oh, I just want to be real informal, they end up being the most formal people, and they don't even really mean that, but I really mean it. I want to be really informal. So informal that I'm going to refer to notes regularly, because I've kind of adapted my plan for today based on how things are going, what I think you might get out of it. So interrupt, let's make it interactive, and we'll also leave time at the end for questions. So to start off, I'll give you a whole, like, the eventual entrepreneur. That's what I started off with. None of us are really entrepreneurs, right? We're not really entrepreneurs, because if we were, then we wouldn't be in this place. I wouldn't have gone to business school. I would be out hustling and doing the whole Gary Vaynerchuk thing, right? We stumble into it and we figure it out, and we have our pathways, and that's okay. That's great. But we're not that classic entrepreneur, and I think we shouldn't lump entrepreneurship into just that path and just that mentality of, like, you're born with it and you're going to hustle and you're going to, drop out of high school or drop out of whatever. Like, we're going to get our degrees here, hopefully, right? And we might not ever start our own business. We might just be flitting around about this idea of entrepreneurship, but we sort of have this interest in the creative side or building something. So whether you do it working for a corporate organization as sort of intrapreneurship, or you're funding something, or you do end up starting, there's no one path here. And it's funny, because I was actually going to end with that, but, like, in the interest of time, let's cut to the chase. Like, we're not really the classic entrepreneurs. There's 7,000 breweries. There's 7,000 different paths to the brewery market. There's a gazillion ways to be an entrepreneur. I'll tell you mine, okay? Mine started off with Sean's odd jobs on a dot matrix printer. What's a dot matrix printer? Look it up on the internet. But it was a newsletter that was like, that I hustled around when I was 13, 14 years old, and got jobs from my neighbors to do the grunt work they didn't want to do. I made good money from that. And that was a little pathway to kind of starting my own thing, like my own little business. I also think my 10 years in the service industry, that is waiting tables, was entrepreneurial in a way. Because you have to, like, hustle to make some money, and it was a little bit different than maybe going into the restaurant world and working an hourly wage. If you could upsell, if you could create, if you could tell a good story, if you could have a good rapport with your guests, then you could make really, really good money. And it's not classic entrepreneurship, but it was like, oh, if I'm on my own and kind of responsible for my own income here, then I can do pretty well for myself. But I always told myself that I wasn't going to be that entrepreneur, because I'm not an inventor. I'm not an engineer, and I'm not a technician. I'm a people person. I waited tables. I went door to door, sort of extroverted that way, right? But I'm not your classic engineer, mathematician, all these things that I set myself short because I thought, well, I'll just be working for an entrepreneur. I'll be business development, I'll do sales and marketing, and I'll just work for the startup world, which is what I did after business school. So I graduated in 2000, and that's right at the dot-com bubble. Worked for a couple of startups, and enjoyed my experience there in RTP. But I learned a lot about what not to do in running a business and working for other entrepreneurs. It was a good experience, but it was chipping away a little bit at this veneer that I had of like, I'm not going to be ever my own boss. And I was already realizing, well, maybe there's something there. And it was around that time where a friend of mine who also stayed local from business school was sharing his continued love for craft beer. Does anybody homebrew here? Anybody a homebrewer? Yeah, excellent. So he was an avid homebrewer. I'm not a homebrewer. But my friend JP Cardona, fellow Fuqua grad, was, and he was like, dude, you got to come to this party. It's at the Bryan Center. And you're like, wait a minute, I know the Bryan Center. Yeah, it was that Bryan Center. There was a party there. And he's like, you got to come to this party. There's all this beer you've never heard of before. Just come, it's going to be a blast. And I was like, great. I thought I knew about good beer because like I bought whatever was on sale at Harris Teeter, using my Vic card. And I was like, I'll go, sure. And this was 2001, 2002. And he opened me up to this whole world that I didn't know existed of beer that was like corked and caged, and it had, batch number 2 on it, and it was like poured into fancy glasses. And I'm like, what the hell is this stuff? And maybe had a little too much of it. But he's like, I was like, where can I get this beer? And he said, well, I mean, these beers are illegal in North Carolina. I'm like, wait, what? And he's like, these beers are above 6% alcohol. You can't buy them in North Carolina. You can't sell them. You can't brew them. It's against the law. I was like, wow, that's a really stupid law. And it kind of gnawed at me. And remember that part where I said I worked for other businesses, other startups, and they didn't really make it? Well, I was unemployed at the time, and I had a little extra time on my hand, and I was like, I'm gonna look into this a little bit more. And so I started kind of prodding and asking questions around and doing a little bit of networking and in the beer world, because I was like, this is really cool. I'd love to figure out how we can get these beers in North Carolina. Found out that North Carolina had this antiquated blue law, a holdover from Prohibition, that made illegal about 1/3 of the world's beer styles. So if you drink beer at all, IPAs, barley wines, Belgian ales, they tend to be above 6% alcohol, and they were illegal in North Carolina since Prohibition. It was a holdover from literally when mill owners were worried that their workers would show up to work drunk on Mondays. Right, so this is the origin of dumb laws, and so like bourbon, wine, of course, the drink of the elite was allowed, but beer, the drink of the working class, was not. So that gnawed at me even more as somebody who's a fan of the working class, right? And I was like, let me take my my business, my MBA and my Master of Public Policy to work, and I'll figure out how to change a law. I had no idea how to do that. We got a group together of like a ragtag group of fellow beer enthusiasts in Durham, and people came from all over the state, and it was about 40 of us, and we literally thought that a petition might work. I mean, we just had no idea. And over time, as a volunteer, as a 3-year endeavor, not paying myself anything, we successfully changed that law. We figured out how to do it. We raised the money to pay a lobbyist to get us the introductions, to make our case, to tell the story, and to convince legislators in a southern state to raise the alcohol cap on beer. And that was an entrepreneurial endeavor, right? That did not pay me squat. I didn't think I would start up a brewery, but as I looked back on it, and as I continued it, as it fades back into the memory of like years and years past, it's been a long time, I realized that was really my first entrepreneurial endeavor. Even though I didn't do it as a business, and I didn't think, yeah, hey.
Can I poke at that a little bit?
Yeah, poke at it.
What drove you for 3 years to do this without getting paid? What was it about that law that just kind of kept you going?
I think that's a good question. Everybody hear the question? Like, what the hell were you thinking? Yeah, it wasn't to start, it wasn't like, it's not part of that narrative like, oh, I wasn't going to start up a business, but oh, looks like I'm going to. I really did not. I think it was it got under my skin, and then I just was the leader. No one rose to the occasion on it. Like, it was like, basically people were like, you're leading this, right? And so once you're in, it's like, okay, well, let's do this thing. Let's see it through. And it was also a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, the most insane theatrical politics you've ever seen. If you want to see politics at its finest, sit in the South where the wholesalers and the Christian right are aligned against your efforts, right? The Christian right being the anti-drinking religious audience, and the wholesalers being we don't want to see change because we make a lot of money the way things are, even though there's a lot more opportunity once this law was changed. Many of them had entrenched interest and didn't see that. So I got caught up in the politics, in the marketing, and the fun of it all, and I wanted to see it through. Good question. Yep. But it was at that time, a couple things happened. One, I wasn't really making it working for other people. I wasn't making it working for other businesses, and I was gaining confidence, chipping away to realize that maybe I sold myself short on this notion of not being an entrepreneur because I'm not a technician, I'm not an engineer, and I was like, oh, maybe my idea is people, and maybe I can do this in spite of not being that classic inventor. Maybe I can even do this in spite of never having brewed beer, because at the time, in 2010, starting Fullsteam, jumping a little bit ahead, I was definitely an odd bird. I did not look like your typical brewer who was starting up a brewer, which was, like what we were talking about earlier, flannel, beard, all that kind of thing. And that was a challenge for me. I was definitely an outsider. There's more diversity and more general, like it's not as stereotypical now as more and more people come into the fold. But then it was, I didn't quite fit in. But I realized that I could be that entrepreneur, and that I was gaining this entrepreneurial experience. And I gave myself this transition time where I said, all right, I'm not going to work for any other business. I'm going to start figuring out on my own how to handle things that had really worried me. One of them was health insurance. I was like, I can't start up a business because I really need health insurance. Well, I figured it out. I started up a consulting organization I just solved that nugget, whatever. I had health insurance, and that was really important to me because in that time frame, I was diagnosed with kidney failure. So it was something that I actually wasn't diagnosed with, but I faced the consequences of. I actually was diagnosed with it here at Fuqua. I got the results from a standard medical check that I was going to have kidney failure eventually, and it came to a head in 2006. And so all these things were kind of hitting me on, I got to solve that problem. If I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to do it now, basically, because my wife was actually a successful match, and she ended up giving me a kidney. It's like a super abbreviated story, but the long and the short of it is that's where the name Fullsteam comes from. The desire to live full steam ahead with purpose and pride, and going, facing those fears, and just barreling forward with that mission. Not a whole lot of people know that. It's not a story that you can tell, very easily in in the craft beer world because it's a little too personal. But we take that spirit of optimism and can do and incorporate that into our core values and into our narrative. I did jump ahead a little bit. I want to kind of put a little bit more color on that transition time where I was post-pop the cap and the lifting of the cap and trying to figure out how I was going to do this on my own. I was formulating this idea of like, okay, so now the cap's been lifted. There's going to be this emergence of craft beer. I can sense it, right? At the time, North Carolina had maybe 24 craft breweries, 2008, 2009. Now we have over 300. And so, you know, we sort of, those of us who were involved in craft beer knew that the landscape was changing. And I was starting to work on my business plan and like formulate my ideas. And I fused my desire, my love of Southern food, which I had kind of had been a big part of my background as a waiter, honestly, at Magnolia Grill here in Durham, with my love for craft beer. And so I was like, let's you know, I want to do this. My business plan was around making distinctly Southern beer using local ingredients. We want to pioneer what we call a Southern beer economy. And at the time, that concept was really quite unique and I think notable, and it's been a good one for us. But that was a big part of the business plan and kind of how we differentiate ourselves. And I remember being with a friend of mine who was, you know, I'm kind of testing out the business plan and scoping it out and kind of fumbling through it a little bit. And she kept on asking me questions like, okay, so cool, like what's your plan and how are you going to do this and how much money you're going to look, you know, like getting a little bit more detail and more granular. And she excused herself for a few minutes. I thought she was going to the bathroom. She came back with a check for $50,000. And I'm like, oh shit, okay. So this is really happening. That was a big linchpin for me. And you know, this first section was like, for me here, is about the eventual entrepreneur. And I would say that was kind of the actual entrepreneur. You're getting money, you're raising, you know, you're forming the LLC. You're like, okay, let's do this thing. And there's no looking back. I'm not going to work for anybody else. Like I'm doing this. So my pathway has been kind of like this eventual build-up and gaining confidence and belief in myself, and then the check, and it was like boom, off to the races. Now it took a while to find a location to raise the rest of the money. That whole process took about a year and a half until we were ready to launch, and that was in 2010. But we did launch with that mission of making distinctly Southern beer. Our very first beer was going to be a test batch of a single beer we hadn't brewed before, a farmhouse ale with local basil and local wheat. And it was going to be a one-time batch for us. We were just going to test out our system. But it ended up being such a big hit that that's been our kind of our summer staple. That's the Southern Basil. It was then Summer Basil. It's now Southern Basil. We brew that beer every year. And it, at the time, had a lot of high standard deviation, let's put it that way. Some people really loved it, and some people really hated it. And I think, you know, as I think about like the so what factor, you know, like what do you so what? What am I getting out of this? As I'm, you know, projecting a little bit for you is we had a fair amount of well, let me put it this way. I literally got hate mail. I literally got, Adam, you might be surprised by this, or you might have received this too, but I literally got people writing me and just saying, like, subject line, give up now. You know? They said, same email, leave the brewing to, it was random, leave the brewing to California, check, okay, Oregon, sure, and Michigan, okay. You know, it was like, it was telling me to just stop, like, don't do this, you're a fool. And I was like, all right, great, I'm on to something. Because I'm pissing enough people off here with this angle and this approach that I must be on to something here. Because if we were just gonna do brown ales and IPAs, then we wouldn't get hate mail. It wouldn't be notable. And so I use that as a motivation that we were definitely onto something. We ended up being Riverbend Malt House's first customer that sold us their first, pretty sure it was their first bag of malted wheat, locally grown wheat. Since then, we've seen 3 malt houses. So they take grain and they malt it, which is to soak it and germinate it and then dry it, and then that's what makes beer. There's now 3 malt houses in North Carolina. In our 8 years of existence, cumulatively, we've purchased $500,000 in North Carolina agriculture, and we're really excited to have this kind of really fulfilled this mission of pioneering a Southern beer economy. The challenge, of course, is that pioneering is one thing, but once it becomes mainstream, and once I saw a brewery in Greensboro that was an English-themed brewery, brewing with foraged local ingredients, I was like, okay, all right, you're in Greensboro, you're an English-themed brewery, and you're using foraged ingredients. We've mainstreamed this thing, and so our challenge moving forward is how do we keep pioneering and how do we keep innovating, especially in a very crowded market. In that process, we've grown as a business, and I went from sort of this reluctant or accidental leader to an actual leader. And I think one thing to really share with you is that the team that gets you along in the early days often isn't the team that you need to keep growing. If you want to do more than, say, a lifestyle business, or if you realize that your business is going to look very different in the early days than it does down the road, right? I had a vision of growing into a sizable brewery. These days, the barrelage size means less than the economic impact that we have on the farming economy and things that I'm really passionate about. I think we can look at other ways of measuring that than just by barrels. But as we matured and grew as a company, we brought on new people and we established more formal metrics and also this crazy thing called core values, right? And formative for me in that was this book called Traction. Has anybody heard of the book Traction? Show of hands. At least one hand. Yeah? Half a hand. Yeah, okay. You've heard of the word traction. Great. For anybody who's ever going to run a business that intends to grow, I really recommend the book. It's been transformative for us, but it also transforms some people out of the company. When the book recommends things like core values and to work on your core values and to understand your core values, and that concept is an anathema to some people who don't really want, that concept feels too corporate or too far into them, then they're not the right people for your growing organization. That's okay for them. That's okay for you, but you have to make those hard choices. Interestingly, a lot of people kind of opted out from that. When we formalized our the business process from this book called Traction, which is called EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, that's when we lost probably the most people that we've ever lost before, in the history of the company. They weren't mad. It wasn't a big revolt. There wasn't some issue. They just opted out. Like, this isn't for me. And those people have gone on into places that you might expect, smaller breweries that are comfortable and where they're happy, and that's great. For us, we want to grow and we want to make a few shockwaves in the world, and we also want to explore the why we exist beyond just making beer. The Golden Circle, yes or no? How much have you delved into this? Simon Sinek's The Golden Circle? More hands. Let's see hands. Yes, I understand what the Golden Circle is. Please don't waste my time. No, I don't know what it is. Please tell me more. All right. The more tell me more wins. Congratulations. Simon Sinek, look up the video. It's pretty damn good. People don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it. And the Golden Circle starts from the what to the how to the why, right? And so in your business, look at not what, we make beer, how we brew it with this equipment, and even the fact that we brew with local ingredients. Why do we exist? We exist for the Southern farmer. We believe in a post-tobacco North Carolina, an economic opportunity for foragers and agricultural entrepreneurs. That's why we exist. We just happen to make beer in the process. If you've seen Simon Sinek's thing, he talks about computers. Basically, his reference point in this well-watched YouTube video is Apple, and it can apply in various disciplines. For us, beer is a pathway. Is that a hand or?
Yeah, I just want to say that he has a book about it.
Yeah, start with why. Yeah, absolutely. Good, great. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's not just believe it or not, it's not just a YouTube video. Yeah, absolutely. And I do highly recommend it because it's also, as I recall, it's a workbook, right? It takes you through that process. Yeah, absolutely. And the why is one of the things that helps us stand out in a crowded field. I'll give you a few other things and kind of highlight how we stand out, because we touched on it in the panel, but I'll give you a little bit more. We're triple bottom line focused. We definitely take our environmental stewardship very seriously. Not surprisingly, as a business that's very concerned about the Southern farm, our environmental impact is something that we take quite seriously. We're also active in a voice for Southern progress. We want to represent Durham and its inclusivity and diversity, and we want to take stands on things that we disagree with about North Carolina and its politics. So when HB2 came out, which was probably maybe a little bit before, depending on when you came to Fuqua, it was a big mess for the state. We took an active stand against that, as did a number of other breweries. And as mentioned, this desire to pioneer a Southern beer economy. But we also recognize it's fun. And so we have this thing called Beautiful Stupid, that the best things in life, as I say to my team, the best things in life are equal parts beautiful and stupid, right? And so what does that mean? We have this thing called the .262 marathon, where we run 1/100th of a marathon. There's the serious run for like that guy and that gal who like want to win the race. I'm not in that race, but I'm in the other race with a bunch of other people that dress up in goofy things, and we just have a lot of fun. And then we do feats of strength, like holding growlers out as long as you can, and it's a hell of a lot of fun because it's beer, which is one of our core values: be present, productive, and fun, right? And then lastly, and this is just like a little thing to kind of on a leadership side, as I go from, as I'm more comfortable in my own voice, is the voice of active voice. Have you talked in any of your communications at all about the difference between passive and active voice? I'm not seeing enough yeses. Okay, so this is probably more of a distinctly American thing, so bear with me on that one. But active voice is ownership and accountability. It's the I am doing, I am making this decision. It's the subject as the actor. Passive voice is mistakes were made. If you have to ask by whom, right? If it's unclear by whom, then you're talking in passive voice. So I abhor passive voice. Versus say, passive voice is abhorred, right? Well, by whom? And so I'll stop meetings when somebody talks in passive voice, and because it's a lot of times passing blame, lack of accountability, lack of ownership, trying not to throw somebody under the bus, right? Like looking out for them. We don't have time for that. That's not why we're in business. We're in business to make decision, make action, resolve conflict, and be active and present. So that's a little thing about my own sort of leadership style that I take really seriously. I'm sorry, it's taken seriously by me. No, it's I take seriously, just seeing if you're paying attention. And so I'll end with a little bit of advice, if I may. We started off, when we launched Fullsteam, we started off kind of with this exploration of what are our 3 words, know your 3 words. And so when you're looking at what you're doing, particularly if you're ever going to start a business, like what are your 3 key words? At the time, it was unexpected Southern adventure. That was like the words that defined us, which is, side note, also the key message of the movie Deliverance. Yeah, if you've seen the movie. And I would say we've probably changed that a little bit from unexpected Southern adventure, because I was like, in prepping for this, I was like, well, you know, is it still unexpected? Because we're 8 years in, it's like maybe not as unexpected, because we have to be a little bit more wise and methodical and thoughtful, because our mistakes when we make them are bigger. And so now I would say it's the pioneer of Southern progress. Like we want to pioneer Southern progress. Like the progress that's sort of social and political, as well as the progress of innovative beer. Also know where you're weak. I'm just, be honest, like as a leader, you're not going to be great at all things. The things that I'm not good at, I have shiny object syndrome. I'm always interested in like the new and inventing and creating. And traction tells you to maintain your eye on the core focus, and our core focus is making beer. But you know, I go from, it's ridiculous how much I want to like, you know, do things beyond beer. You know, just because it's fun to invent stuff, you know, and it's probably best to let that just be creative in your brain. Or if it's like maybe someday you're going to focus on that, then give yourself some true time to build that out. But I just at least have to recognize that I have shiny object syndrome. I also, I have to be honest, I don't like managing people. I'm not a good manager of people. I'm not a great mentor of people because I get frustrated by people. I'm a creative type, and I like working on my creative idea. I'm not proud of it, but I recognize it. Metrics matter. Just because we're a brewery, we take really seriously KPIs and metrics. Has anybody ever worked with Power BI? Yeah, I see a nod and a head. Yeah, I really love Power BI. Are you using it, or are you just kind of tooled around with it a little bit?
Yeah, I used it as part of my internship as well.
Yeah, it's a Microsoft tool that's basically takes pivot tables and Excel to a whole new visualization. And it's cheap. It's not that expensive. It's $10 a month per user. And it's really a great tool for managing and understanding your numbers. And then, you know, I think coming full circle on the conversation is like, you know, I started off with none of us are entrepreneurs. Be honest, like there's a gazillion different pathways. The traditional approach, the stereotypical approach of entrepreneurship is that's a fallacy in and of itself. The whole invented in a garage. There's a myth to that. Just because we're here in business school, just because you might take a job because you got a good bonus, like it's okay. Do your thing, and if you're meant to be an entrepreneur, just work your way into it. I hope you can see that I've done that over the years, and I became this, you know, sort of eventual entrepreneur to actual entrepreneur to reluctant leader to actual leader. The last thing I'd leave with you, and then we have a few minutes, I think, for questions, is one thing that I'm very mindful of is as you work to gain awareness, recognition, and you refine your story, be mindful of what C.S. Lewis calls the fallacy of the inner circle, sometimes the fallacy of the inner ring. Are we 2 for 2 on this? You know that one too? Yeah, that's great. I'm super encouraged by that. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it's like, okay, cool, good. Sorry. Yeah, no, the fallacy of the inner ring is basically that our desire to break through into an inner circle of more prestige and more power is an endless quest, because once you get through one layer of the ring, the fallacy is there's just another ring there. Right? And the ring will never seek to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and it'll get harder and harder to break through. But that C.S. Lewis says the true craftsman, and I would say the true artisan or the craftsperson, removes him or herself from that pursuit, stands alone, and focuses on that person's craft. And so whatever you do in your endeavor, try not to get so caught up in the inner ring and the breaking through. Refine your craft, refine your voice, and lead the way. So with that, questions? Yes.
So I found it really interesting that you talked about how important core values are to your business.
I believe you need a microphone. Tables have turned.
So I found it interesting that you talked about how important core values are to your business. And we started the day hearing from Zach talk about how important the mission of Teamworks was to his business. Can you go a little deeper into exactly when you started to think about establishing those core values, who was involved within the team that made the decision of what those values were, especially because I would think that it would be kind of a company-wide establishment, but it sounds like some of the people in the company did not agree with those values and thus left. So,
yeah, what a great question. So Traction, the book, talks about basically two approaches to core values, collaborative and as a team building exercise, or going out and forming them on your own. Frankly, I knew that I didn't have the right people. They weren't aligned with me, and so I made the difficult. Wasn't even really difficult. I just made there's a difference between like difficult and hard. Like it was hard to do it. It wasn't like, should I do this or not? It was just like, I really need to do this on my own because, again, not to throw anybody under the bus, but it was just like, you know, I don't enjoy these people. I don't have a good team. Like, so I did it on my own. And it's not that the values themselves, they're just like, misaligned, or they were like, well, I disagree with that. It's, again, the process of it. You can't fault, like, no one looks at our values and thinks like, you know, oh, those are screwy. It's just for the purposes of discussion. It's think like an optimist, seek truth and beauty, listen with empathy, speak with quiet confidence, and be present, productive, and fun, right? Those are our 5 core values. Right, and they really are good. And now we hire based on that. We fire based on that. We train based on that. We, we expand our business offerings based on that. But it just wasn't for everyone. I kind of knew that going in. So that was part of growing up. Thank you.
Well, I read Start With Why, and I find it fascinating, the idea to start with why. Now that you actually explained about the 3 bottom line and all the stuff, like that really resonates with me, and probably gonna have more beer. But my point is, do you make an effort to transmit that? Because to be honest, I have no idea whatsoever until I heard it from you.
Yeah, that's timely because in an hour we're actually going to have the food and agricultural group come to Fullsteam to help us with this challenge. Because you're saying you didn't know that about Fullsteam or about beer in general?
About Fullsteam.
Yeah, we don't do a very good job of it. That goes to Mikkel's point earlier, is like we're our own experts, and we have what I learned here in business school, the curse of knowledge, Chip Heath's curse of knowledge. I know very well what this mission is, and the Southern beer kind of you saw it rolls off the tip of my tongue, right? But none of you have heard that, you know, and the challenge is really how do we communicate that really well, and we can do a much better job in the tavern visualizing that, showcasing our farmers, using video and doing interviews with our foraging endeavors and all of that. The challenge, of course, in that storytelling is time and resources because, you know, I'm doing the social media right now, and I'm doing the web updates and all of that. I'm designing labels right now. It's really stupid. So, you know, is the next best hire investing in a storyteller, or is the next best thing to spend that money on a larger cooler? You know, and it's always a challenge. That said, there's a reason we're having the club come over and help us with that challenge, because you should know that about us, you know? The opportunity for us to share that one-on-one or like in small group is really exciting, but for any scale, we really need to be, to know that. And also too, and I'll wrap up with this, we pioneered the Southern, we were the first ones to do it, right? At a time when we got hate mail. We've gone from hate mail to shrugs, right? We've gone from people being irked about it in 8 years to people being like, oh, they use local ingredients? Yeah, who doesn't, right? So the challenge for us is what's next. Yep, good. All right, thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun. Cheers.
Thank you.